The rhythmic thud of a basketball echoed through the quiet suburban park, a sharp contrast to the lazy chirping of birds and the distant hum of passing cars. Jamal, his sneakers squeaking on the asphalt court, was lost in the joy of his solitary game. At just 11 years old, he had a knack for basketball that belied his age. With each practiced dribble and arc of the ball toward the net, his world felt uncomplicated and safe. That was, until Karen arrived. Karen Jenkins, a middle-aged woman with neatly styled blonde hair and an air of self-importance, had been walking her small white terrier along the park's paved trail. Her sharp eyes scanned the area, and they landed on Jamal. Alone, wearing a hoodie, and focused on his game, he didn't fit the image of who she expected to see in this pristine suburban enclave. Her grip on the leash tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She watched him for a moment, her thoughts swirling. Why is he here? What's he up to? Karen's mind conjured scenarios, none of them innocent. In her world, where everything was compartmentalized into neat boxes, Jamal didn't belong in this one. The boy, oblivious to her scrutiny, retrieved the ball after a particularly satisfying shot. His smile faltered when he noticed her standing near the court, her eyes drilling into him. Her presence was unsettling, but Jamal shrugged it off. Just keep playing, he told himself. He'd grown used to the occasional stares. He was one of the only black kids in this neighborhood, but today felt different. Karen, however, couldn't let it go. As she stood there, her discomfort morphed into resolve. Pulling out her phone, she hesitated for only a moment before dialing. The conversation was short and clipped. "Yes, there's someone suspicious at the park," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured urgency. "A young man, possibly up to no good. Could you send someone to check it out?" She ended the call and crossed her arms, satisfied she'd done her civic duty. Her dog barked once, as if to punctuate her thoughts. Karen glanced around, seeking affirmation from other park-goers, but most were minding their own business, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Jamal continued his game, though now his movements were more hesitant. He'd seen Karen speaking on her phone and couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with him. His mother's words echoed in his mind, "Always be polite. Always stay calm. Some people will assume the worst about you, no matter what." Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens shattered the park's serenity. 2 patrol cars pulled up, their flashing lights refracting off the playground's colorful equipment. Officers stepped out, their presence instantly shifting the atmosphere. Karen approached them, waving eagerly. "It's him," she said, pointing toward Jamal. "He's been loitering and acting suspicious. I don't know what he's planning, but it's better to be safe." The officers exchanged glances before walking toward Jamal, their expressions professional but wary. One of them, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, spoke first. "Hey there, buddy. Can we have a word?" Jamal froze, clutching the basketball tightly. He nodded, his voice caught in his throat. The other officer knelt slightly, trying to meet his eye level. "What's your name, son?" "Jamal," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. Just playing basketball." Karen, standing a few feet away, interjected. "You see? He's defensive. That's what they do when they're hiding something." The taller officer shot her a look but didn't respond. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Some held their phones up, recording the scene. A woman in jogging gear whispered to her friend, "He's just a kid. This doesn't seem right." Jamal's heart raced as he glanced at the growing crowd. He wanted to explain, to plead his case, but his voice felt too small, too fragile. Then, quietly, he said something that made Karen's smug expression falter. "My mom's the governor." Karen laughed dismissively, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please." But the murmurs from the crowd grew louder. One voice cut through the noise. "Wait, did he just say Governor Walker?" Karen's confidence began to waver as the officers glanced at each other. Jamal nodded, his gaze steady now, despite the fear still lingering in his chest. And in that moment, the dynamics began to shift. The air in the park was heavy with tension, punctuated only by the hum of cell phones capturing the unfolding scene. Jamal stood still, clutching his basketball as the officers loomed over him. His pulse thudded in his ears, but he kept his gaze steady, just as his mother had taught him. Karen stepped closer, arms crossed, her confidence radiating smug entitlement. "I told you," she said, addressing the officers. "He's up to something. Just look at him, he doesn't belong here." Officer Harris, the taller of the two officers, turned to Karen with a neutral expression. "Ma'am, we're going to handle this. Please step back." The tone was polite but firm. Karen, however, seemed emboldened by the attention, gesturing animatedly at Jamal as though presenting evidence. "He's been lurking around here for a while," she insisted. "I mean, what kid plays alone in a park like this? It's suspicious." The shorter officer, Ramirez, crouched slightly to Jamal's level. His voice was softer. "Jamal, right? Do you have anyone here with you? A parent or guardian?" Jamal nodded cautiously. "No, sir. I came by myself. My mom's at work." Karen scoffed audibly. "Of course she is," she muttered, earning sharp glances from nearby onlookers. By now, the small crowd had grown larger, with murmurs of concern rippling through the gathering. Several people had begun recording on their phones, and a few stepped forward to defend the boy. "He's just a kid," a man in a baseball cap called out. "Leave him alone." "Exactly," another woman chimed in. "He's been here for an hour, just shooting hoops. He hasn't bothered anyone." Karen turned toward the crowd, her voice rising. "You don't know what he was planning. I was just trying to protect the community." Officer Harris raised a hand to quiet the escalating noise. "All right, everyone, let's stay calm. We're just here to sort things out." Jamal, sensing an opening, finally found his voice. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just came here to play basketball." His words were measured, but filled with the frustration of someone far too young to be explaining himself in such a situation. Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. They always say that." Before the officers could respond, Jamal added, "I told you before, my mom's Governor Walker. Call her if you want." His voice was steady now, bolstered by a mix of fear and defiance. The name seemed to ripple through the crowd like a current. A few bystanders exchanged knowing glances, murmuring, "Governor Walker? The Sophia Walker?" Karen's confident facade cracked ever so slightly. "Governor Walker? That's ridiculous," she said, though her voice lacked its previous conviction. Officer Ramirez, however, raised an eyebrow and turned to his partner. "Harris, maybe we should verify." Officer Harris nodded and stepped away, radioing the station. The crowd grew quieter, the weight of potential ramifications sinking in. Karen fidgeted with her phone, her earlier confidence now a distant memory. Minutes felt like hours as the scene played out. When Harris returned, his expression was unreadable. "We've confirmed it. Jamal's mother is Governor Sophia Walker." Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her earlier certainty had vanished, replaced by an unmistakable panic. You're joking," she stammered, glancing at Jamal, then back at the officers. "That's impossible." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as people pieced together what was happening. Several began confronting Karen directly. "So you called the cops on the governor's kid?" one man asked, his voice dripping with incredulity. "This is gonna go viral," another said, holding up their phone. Karen's face flushed deep red, but she was still scrambling to justify her actions. "I was just trying to do the right thing," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to know?" "That's the problem," a jogger in the crowd muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "You didn't even bother to ask." Before Karen could respond, the sound of an approaching car diverted everyone's attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the park entrance, the unmistakable insignia of the governor's office on the door. The crowd parted as a poised and determined figure stepped out. Governor Sophia Walker, dressed in a tailored navy blazer, strode toward the scene with an air of quiet authority. Her eyes immediately found her son, and she walked straight to him, pulling him into a protective hug. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but she seemed paralyzed, unable to process the shift in power dynamics. Sophia released Jamal and turned her attention to the officers. Her voice was calm but commanding. "What exactly is going on here?" she asked, scanning the crowd and then locking eyes with Karen. Karen, for the first time, looked utterly speechless. The park fell silent as Governor Sophia Walker stood tall, her sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, the tension crackling like electricity in the air. She was every bit the commanding presence that had propelled her to office, poised, resolute, and unshakable. Sophia knelt briefly to check on Jamal, her hands gently resting on his shoulders. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Jamal nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine, Mom." Sophia gave him a reassuring squeeze before rising to her full height, her attention shifting to the two officers. "Gentlemen," she began, her tone calm but laced with authority, "would you care to explain why my son was detained in the middle of a public park?" Officer Harris, who had been managing the situation with as much professionalism as he could muster, stepped forward. "Governor Walker, there was a call about suspicious behavior. We responded to ensure everything was in order. No harm was intended." Sophia's expression didn't waver. "A call about suspicious behavior," she repeated slowly, her voice carrying an edge now. Her eyes shifted to Karen, who stood frozen a few feet away, her face pale and uncertain. "And who made that call?" Karen, realizing the attention was now squarely on her, cleared her throat nervously. I did," she admitted, her voice trembling. I thought something might be wrong. I didn't know." Sophia held up a hand, silencing her. "What exactly did you think was wrong, Ms. Jenkins?" Karen answered quietly. "Karen Jenkins." Sophia nodded, her gaze unrelenting. "Ms. Jenkins, what did you see that made you think it necessary to involve the police?" "My son, as I understand it, was playing basketball." Karen stammered, searching for words. "Well, he was alone. And wearing a hoodie. And I just thought. I mean, he didn't look like." "Didn't look like what?" Sophia interrupted, her voice firm but measured. Karen faltered, her confidence crumbling under the governor's unwavering scrutiny. Like he belonged here," she finally said, almost inaudibly. The crowd, already restless, erupted in murmurs of outrage. Several bystanders shook their heads in disbelief, while others called out, "Are you serious? And this is unbelievable." Sophia raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. Her gaze never left Karen. "Ms. Jenkins, let me be clear. My son belongs wherever he chooses to be, just as much as anyone else. Your assumptions about who does or doesn't belong here are not only offensive but dangerous. Do you realize the weight of what you've done today?" Karen's mouth opened as though to respond, but no sound came out. Her confidence, so resolute when she'd called the police, had completely evaporated. Sophia turned to Officer Harris. "Thank you for responding promptly, but I trust the situation has been clarified. Jamal was doing nothing wrong, and he was certainly not a threat. I assume there will be no further action taken against him." Harris nodded. "Absolutely, Governor. We'll close the report." Sophia offered a curt nod before addressing the crowd. Her voice carried the conviction of a leader who had spent her career fighting for justice. "This incident isn't just about my son. It's about the assumptions we make about each other and the harm those assumptions can cause. Today, my family was targeted, but this happens to countless others who don't have the privilege of my platform or resources." The crowd responded with scattered applause, a murmur of agreement rippling through the bystanders. Several people nodded in solidarity, their phones still recording. Sophia turned back to Karen, who looked like she wanted to melt into the ground. "Ms. Jenkins, I suggest you take some time to reflect on your actions. You've caused unnecessary distress not only to my son but to this entire community." Karen, her voice barely audible, muttered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Sophia's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. "It's not enough to apologize, Ms. Jenkins. Change starts with understanding and action. I hope you'll take steps to educate yourself and ensure this doesn't happen again." Karen nodded, her eyes downcast. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her shoulders. Sophia turned to Jamal, placing a gentle hand on his back. "Let's go home," she said, her voice warm now, the protective mother eclipsing the commanding politician. As they walked toward her SUV, the crowd parted, offering words of support and encouragement. Someone called out, "You're doing the right thing, Governor." Another said, "We've got your back, Jamal." Jamal looked up at his mother as they reached the car. "Mom, are people always going to think I don't belong?" Sophia's expression softened, and she knelt to look him in the eye. "Some might, baby," she said gently. "But we're going to keep fighting to change that, together." With that, they drove off, leaving behind a crowd that had witnessed not just an incident, but a powerful reminder of the work still needed to combat prejudice. The viral videos hit the internet before Sophia and Jamal even arrived home. Clips of Karen pointing accusingly at Jamal, Sophia's calm yet commanding confrontation, and the collective outrage of the bystanders spread like wildfire across social media. By evening, the incident dominated local news stations, with headlines like "Governor confronts racial profiling incident at local park" and "Governor's son targeted in false police call." Karen Jenkins, however, wasn't prepared for the storm brewing outside her comfortable suburban bubble. The next morning, Karen sat at her dining room table, nervously scrolling through her phone. Notifications flooded her screen, texts from friends and family, missed calls, and social media mentions. Most of them were not in her favor. "This is what happens when you jump to conclusions. Racism has no place in our community, Karen. Shameful. You owe that boy and his family a real apology." Karen's hands shook as she scrolled further, seeing herself in countless videos, her face tense, her finger pointing at Jamal, her words dissected frame by frame. The backlash was relentless. Her neighbors, previously polite and friendly, now avoided her. She felt the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on her chest. But the reckoning was far from over. That same day, Governor Sophia Walker held a press conference outside the state capitol building. The media swarmed the steps, their cameras and microphones aimed at the governor, who stood flanked by Jamal and her chief of staff. The boy, dressed in a crisp collared shirt and jeans, looked composed but guarded, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Sophia stepped forward, her voice calm yet unwavering. "Yesterday, an incident occurred that highlighted an issue far too common in our society, the dangers of implicit bias. My son, Jamal, was wrongfully accused and subjected to an unnecessary police response. While I am grateful no harm came to him, we cannot ignore the underlying problem that led to this." The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, but Sophia raised her hand, silencing them. "This is not just about my family. It's about the countless other families who face similar situations without the benefit of media attention or public support. We must address the systemic biases that perpetuate these harmful encounters." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I want to be clear, this is not about vilifying individuals, but about recognizing and challenging the prejudices that exist within all of us. True accountability begins with education and a willingness to listen." Sophia turned to Jamal, who took a deep breath before stepping up to the microphone. His voice was steady but tinged with emotion. "I just wanted to play basketball. I didn't do anything wrong, but I was treated like I didn't belong. That's not fair, to me or anyone else." The audience murmured their support as Jamal stepped back, and Sophia placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Karen watched the press conference from her living room, her face pale. She had avoided reporters all day, refusing to answer the door or the phone. Now, seeing the governor's calm but damning words, she realized there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. The video cut to a statement from the police department, with the chief confirming that Karen could face legal repercussions for filing a false report. While we are relieved the situation did not escalate, this serves as a reminder that emergency services should never be weaponized against individuals based on unfounded suspicions, the chief said. Karen felt the ground beneath her shift. Legal consequences? Public scorn? Her mind raced as she struggled to comprehend how her single phone call had spiraled into a national story. Later that evening, Sophia received a call from Karen. It was brief and hesitant, with Karen stumbling through an apology. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice shaking. I made a mistake. Sophia listened silently before responding. Ms. Jenkins, I appreciate your apology, but this isn't just about me or my son. This is about a larger issue, and it won't be solved with a simple sorry. I suggest you reflect deeply on your actions and consider how you can contribute to meaningful change. Karen's voice broke. I don't know how to fix this. That's something you'll need to figure out, Sophia replied calmly, ending the call. The following days saw Sophia's words spark a broader conversation. Communities organized forums on implicit bias, police departments reviewed protocols for responding to suspicious activity calls, and schools began incorporating lessons on empathy and inclusion into their curricula. The incident at the park became a catalyst for change. For Jamal, the experience left an indelible mark. But as he stood beside his mother at another community event a week later, he saw the beginnings of something better, a community coming together, determined to be more understanding, more equitable, and more united. And in the crowd, unnoticed by most, Karen stood quietly at the back, watching, listening, and learning. The town hall was packed, the room buzzing with energy as residents gathered to discuss the recent incident that had gripped the community. Governor Sophia Walker stood at the front, poised and confident, her son Jamal sitting quietly in the first row. The event had been planned as a forum for open dialogue, a chance to address the broader implications of what had happened at the park and to chart a path forward. The moderator, a respected community leader named Reverend Daniels, stepped up to the microphone. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice calm but firm. We're here today to discuss not just what happened to Jamal, but the larger issues it brings to light. We have a unique opportunity to learn, to grow, and to create a safer, more inclusive community. The crowd settled, their attention focused on the governor as she approached the microphone. Her voice carried the perfect balance of authority and warmth. This isn't an easy conversation, but it's a necessary one. What happened to my son was not an isolated event. It was a reflection of deeper issues that exist in communities across the country. Today, we have an opportunity to confront these problems together. Sophia's eyes swept across the audience, making sure to connect with as many faces as she could. Implicit bias is something we all carry, whether we acknowledge it or not. It shapes our perceptions, our decisions, and, in some cases, it leads to harm. My son's experience should be a wake-up call for all of us. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. After a pause, Sophia continued, this isn't about blame. It's about accountability. It's about asking ourselves the hard questions. What biases do we hold? How do those biases influence our actions? And most importantly, what are we going to do to change? As she spoke, Karen Jenkins sat quietly in the back of the room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had come reluctantly, unsure of how she would be received, but as Sophia's words resonated through the room, Karen felt an uncomfortable truth settle in her chest. She had been wrong, deeply, shamefully wrong, and now she was faced with the consequences of her actions. When the floor was opened for comments, several residents came forward. A young black man shared his own experiences of being profiled. A white mother spoke about teaching her children to challenge stereotypes. A local police officer explained steps the department was taking to improve how they responded to calls like the one at the park. Finally, Karen rose from her seat. The room turned to her, a hush falling over the crowd as she made her way to the microphone. Her hands trembled as she adjusted it, her face pale and drawn. I don't know where to start," she began, her voice shaking. "What I did was wrong. There's no excuse for it. I let my own fears and biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt people because of it. To Jamal, to Governor Walker, and to this community, I am truly sorry." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I can't undo what I did, but I want to do better. I want to learn and be part of the solution, not the problem. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to making that journey." The room was silent for a moment before Reverend Daniels spoke. "Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Accountability is the first step toward change. Now, it's about action." Sophia nodded, stepping back to the microphone. "We all have a role to play. This isn't just about one person or one incident, it's about creating a culture where everyone feels seen, valued, and safe. That work starts here and now." The forum ended with a sense of hope and purpose. Committees were formed to address diversity and inclusion in the community. Plans were made for workshops and training sessions. And while the scars of the incident remained, they served as a reminder of the work still to be done. For Jamal, the evening marked a turning point. As he left the town hall with his mother, he looked up at her and smiled. "Do you think things will get better?" he asked. Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "I think they can, Jamal. As long as people are willing to listen, learn, and grow, there's always hope." And in the quiet of the evening, as the governor and her son walked to their car, the distant hum of voices from the town hall carried with it a promise, a commitment to do better, not just for Jamal, but for everyone.